It was supposed to be an ordinary night at Lena's diner, the small roadside place she had kept alive with nothing but long work hours, burned fingers, tired smiles, and a heart that refused to give up even when the world around her made life difficult. And tonight was no different as the storm outside howled like something hungry and angry, rain smashing against the windows hard enough to rattle them in their frames while thunder rolled in the distance like heavy drums. And Lena, a black woman, in her early 40s who carried both strength and exhaustion in her bones, moved behind the counter refilling coffee for the 3 customers still brave or desperate enough to be out in weather like this, her feet aching in old shoes, her apron smeared with grease, but her spirit still softer than she would ever admit. She wiped down the counter with slow circles, thinking about bills due in the morning, thinking about how the roof still leaked in the storage room, thinking about how she hadn't slept more than 5 hours in 3 days, but she kept moving because stopping meant drowning in stress she didn't have time to feel. And then, just as she reached for another coffee pot, the door slammed open with a violent gust of wind that made napkins fly, menus scatter, and the little bell above the entrance ring so hard it almost snapped. Everyone turned at once. A man stumbled in, soaked from the storm, water dripping from his hair, jacket torn, breathing harshly like he had run miles on broken lungs, and he clutched the frame of the door for balance before dragging himself inside, leaving a trail of mud and rain across the worn-out floor. The regulars froze, eyes widening, forks paused mid-air, because on the back of his leather vest, though ripped, faded, and covered in dirt, was a symbol known across the country, the Hells Angels patch. One customer whispered, "Oh no," another whispered, "He brings trouble," and a third mumbled, "Just call the police." And the fear in their voices wasn't subtle. It was sharp, immediate, and full of assumptions, but Lena's eyes saw something nobody else paid attention to. She saw the man's trembling hands, the bluish tint on his lips, the way one side of his face was swollen like he had been hit with something hard, and the way he kept blinking like he was trying to stay conscious. She saw fear, not the dangerous kind, but the human kind, the kind that comes when someone is running from something bigger than themselves. Before she could speak, the man took 2 shaky steps inside, then another, his boots heavy with mud and water, and he whispered in a broken voice, "Help, please." Just as the door burst open again. This time not from the wind, but from 2 police officers charging inside with their hands on their weapons, their faces twisted with aggression so raw that even the storm outside felt calmer in comparison. "There he is. Nobody move," the first officer shouted, pointing at the biker like he was a wild animal instead of a bleeding man. The second officer shoved chairs aside, eyes locked on the injured stranger, and the biker raised his hands slowly, palms up, fear flickering across his face as he whispered, "Please, don't let them take me. I didn't do anything," and Lena felt her stomach drop because his voice didn't sound like that of a criminal. It sounded like someone begging for his life. The officers didn't walk toward him. They stormed him, boots slamming against the floor, shoulders tight with rage, and something in their fury felt wrong, too sharp, too personal, too eager, like they weren't here for justice but for revenge. The customers backed into corners, heads down, not wanting to be involved in whatever storm was about to break. Everyone stepped back. Everyone except Lena. She moved without thinking, her feet carrying her forward before her mind caught up, placing herself between the biker and the police as if some invisible instinct had yanked her there, and she spread her arms slightly, shielding the injured man from officers twice her size. "You're not taking him," she said quietly, but her voice carried through the diner like a blade slicing through air. The regulars gasped, one covering his mouth, another whispering, "Lena, what are you doing?" But Lena didn't move. She didn't blink. She didn't care that her heart pounded so hard she thought it might break her ribs. The taller officer growled, "Lady, step aside," taking a threatening step forward. Lena didn't move. "Not until you tell me what is done," she said calmly. "And why he's bleeding." The officer's jaw tightened. "He assaulted an officer," he barked, voice too loud, too defensive. The biker behind Lena shook his head violently, whispering, "No, I didn't, they jumped me," and Lena could hear the truth in his breath, in the quiver of his words, in the terror in his eyes. Something wasn't right. Something was hidden. And Lena had lived long enough to recognize when authority was lying to her face. The second officer shoved his finger toward the biker. He resisted arrest. Now move aside. Lena raised her chin. If he resisted, why does he look like he got beaten by 5 men? The officer's face reddened, not with shame, but with anger, and he stepped in so close Lena could smell the coffee on his breath. Move, he warned. Lena whispered, no, and that single word changed everything. The biker behind her made a tiny sound, a mixture of disbelief and gratitude, and the entire diner felt like it had stopped breathing. The officers exchanged a look, the kind that promised trouble, the kind that said they would make her pay for this. And Lena knew she was risking everything, her diner, her job, her safety, but her conscience refused to let her step aside. She had seen too much injustice in her life to let another person suffer in front of her while she stayed silent. The officer reached for the biker again, and Lena slammed her hand under the counter, hitting the emergency alarm button that sent a silent signal to her cousin at the sheriff's office. The officer's eyes widened. Sirens could already be heard approaching in the distance. The officers hesitated. The biker's knees buckled. And as he collapsed forward, Lena caught him, her arms around a stranger who would change her life forever, never realizing that her decision to stand in front of him had just put her name inside the phones of every Hell's Angel across the state. And by sunrise, over 300 bikers would come roaring to her door, not for revenge, but to honor the woman who saved one of their own. Lena's arms tightened around the collapsing biker as the sirens grew louder outside, her heart pounding so violently that she could feel it echo in her throat. And for a moment she wasn't sure if she was holding up a stranger or the weight of a choice that would change her entire life, because the biker, whose name she still didn't know, was shaking uncontrollably. Blood dripping from a deep cut near his temple, his breath sharp and uneven like every inhale scraped against broken ribs, and while the customers backed into corners, whispering about how Lena had just ruined her own safety and maybe even her business, Lena ignored the noise, ignored the fear, and focused only on the terrified man whispering through cracked lips, "They weren't supposed to find me, please. Don't let them take me back," his voice trembling like he was reliving a nightmare. Just then, the police officers took a step forward, fury tightening their faces because the moment Lena had pressed the emergency alarm, the power balance in the diner shifted. No longer were they in control. No longer could they do whatever they wanted without question, and the taller officer growled, "Lady, you're interfering with law enforcement, that's a felony." But Lena shot back with a calmness she didn't actually feel inside, and beating a man who's already down is illegal too. And for the first time their confidence cracked, a ripple of uncertainty flashing between them as they realized backup was coming, backup they didn't control. The biker's body sagged more heavily against her, his eyes glassy and unfocused, whispering, "You shouldn't have helped me. They'll come for you too, they always come." But Lena tightened her grip and whispered into his ear, "Let them come. I'm not afraid of people who hurt others." The diners watched with wide eyes as Lena lowered him carefully onto a booth seat, her hands gentle but firm, checking his pulse like she had seen nurses do, noticing the bruises that covered his ribs in clear shapes. Shapes that looked like baton strikes, not fists, not accidents, but calculated blows delivered with intent. An anger stirred deep inside her chest, mixing with fear until it became something fierce. Suddenly the diner lights flickered as the storm outside howled louder, the wind slamming into the windows with a force that matched the tension inside. And just as the officers looked like they were preparing to drag Lena aside by force, red and blue lights flashed across the diner walls. Different sirens, different vehicles. And a second later the door burst open again, this time revealing the sheriff's deputy, a woman named Carla who had known Lena for years. Her expression fierced the moment. She saw the scene, snapping, "Officers, step away from that man." And instantly the officers stiffened, because Carla outranked them in the county, and they could no longer hide their intentions under fake justification. Carla rushed forward, kneeling beside the biker, her eyes widening at the injuries. "What happened to him?" she demanded. The officers exchanged stiff glances. "He resisted arrest," one muttered. Carla shook her head angrily. "Don't lie to me. These wounds aren't from resisting. This is an assault." The biker flinched at the word assault, his voice breaking again as he whispered, "They beat me, behind the bar. I didn't do anything. I just tried to stop a woman from being attacked." And Carla's expression darkened. She stood up slowly, her deputy badge glinting as she stepped toward the officers. "Did you lay hands on this man outside of protocol?" The taller officer scoffed. "Deputy, you don't understand what." But Carla cut him off, voice cold as steel. "Answer me." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and full of guilt neither officer could hide. The diner customers began whispering louder, some pulling out their phones now that they realized Lena might have been right all along. The biker trembled violently, his breath uneven, and Lena knelt beside him again, placing a hand on his shoulder, whispering softly, "You're safe now. They won't hurt you again." But his fear was too deep, too old, too raw, and he whispered back, "You don't understand. When one angel gets hurt, the whole club hears about it, and they're going to come looking for me, for you, for all of us." Lena froze slightly at that, because she knew the reputation, she knew the stories, but before she could ask him anything, Carla leaned down and gently checked his pulse again, whispering, "We need to get him to a hospital. He's lost a lot of blood." And then the door opened yet again as paramedics rushed in with a stretcher. The officers stepped aside reluctantly, glaring at Lena like she had personally destroyed their careers, but Lena ignored them as the paramedics carefully lifted the biker onto the stretcher, his hand reaching out for her weakly, whispering, "Don't leave, please don't leave." And without hesitation Lena grabbed his hand, squeezing gently as she walked beside him outside into the storm, shielding him from the rain with her arm. The wind blew so hard it nearly knocked her sideways, but she stayed close as they placed him inside the ambulance, and when Carla turned to her and said softly, "You can ride with him if you want," Lena nodded without hesitation and climbed inside, the doors closing behind her with a metallic thud that echoed in her bones. As the ambulance sped toward the hospital, sirens cutting through the storm like blades, the biker whispered something she could barely hear, "My name is Ryder." Lena squeezed his hand again. "I'm Lena. You're going to be okay." Ryder's eyes fluttered, his voice faint. "No, not just because of me. Because of you, your kindness. They'll hear about it, all of them, my brothers." But Lena didn't understand. Not fully. Not yet. She only knew she couldn't let this man die alone. As the ambulance lights faded into the storm, the two officers stood in the diner parking lot, drenched and furious, one muttering through clenched teeth, "She has no idea what she just started," and the other replying darkly, "Yeah, she just called the whole damn Hell's Angels army to this town." And miles away, in biker bars and clubhouses across the state, Ryder's name lit up dozens of phones, followed by one chilling message, "Ryder down. Woman at diner protected him. Gather." And by dawn, 300 bikes would be riding toward one woman who had no idea she had just become family. The hospital lights flickered softly as the storm raged outside, the sky roaring with thunder as if the world itself was reacting to the chaos Lena had stepped into. And inside the emergency room Ryder lay unconscious on a narrow bed, his breathing shallow, his bruises darkening, his skin cold from blood loss, while Lena sat beside him with her hands clasped tightly together, praying. Silently, even though she wasn't sure who she was praying to anymore, because fear and responsibility twisted together inside her chest like two vines choking the same heart, and she kept replaying every moment from the diner. The officer's rage, the way Ryder whispered for help, the look in his eyes that made her step forward when everyone else ran back. And with every replay she felt the weight of her choice settle deeper into her bones, heavier than she expected, heavier than she wished. But still something she didn't regret, not for a single second, because protecting someone wasn't a mistake. The real mistake would have been looking away. Nurses moved around them, stitching wounds, checking vitals, whispering to each other with concerned expressions. But every time Ryder stirred or flinched, Lena leaned closer, brushing his hair from his forehead with trembling fingers. Whispering softly, "You're safe now, Ryder, you're safe." Though deep down she feared he wasn't. Not with the police angry, not with the truth still hidden, not with whatever he meant about brothers coming, and the longer she sat there, the more she wondered what exactly she had stepped into, until the curtain rustled and Deputy Carla stepped inside, her uniform soaked, her hair damp from the storm, but her eyes focused and sharp. She pulled up a chair beside Lena and spoke quietly. "The officers who chased him, their story has holes. Something's off. I'm going to look into it." Lena nodded but didn't speak, her eyes glued to Ryder's still form. Carla continued with a sigh, "Lena, you did the right thing tonight. But I need you to understand something. Those officers, they're not going to forget this. They're angry. And cornered men do stupid things. Lena swallowed hard, whispering, "Let them. I won't let them hurt him again." Carla studied her for a moment, admiration flickering in her eyes. "Most people don't stand up like you did." Lena kept her gaze on Ryder. "Most people weren't raised by a woman tougher than steel who taught me to treat people like human beings." Carla smiled faintly, but her eyes soon drifted to Ryder. "Do you know who he is?" Lena shook her head. "Only his first name." Carla exhaled slowly, leaning back as if deciding whether to say the next words. "He's not just a biker." She paused. "He's a Hell's Angel." Lena nodded. "I know. I saw the patch." "No," Carla said gently. "Not just any angel. Their president's son." The words hit Lena like a shockwave, her breath catching in her throat as she looked at Ryder again, suddenly seeing him not just as a wounded stranger but as someone connected to something far larger, far louder, far more dangerous than even the corrupted officers she confronted. "Are you sure?" she whispered. Carla nodded. "Positive. I just got confirmation from another unit." Lena's heart raced. "So when he said they'll come," Carla finished the sentence quietly, "he meant all of them." Before Lena could respond, the hospital doors burst open in the distance, the wind howling inside for a moment before the doors slammed shut again, and a nurse ran past their curtain whispering urgently, "There's a group forming outside, men in leather jackets, lots of them." And Carla stood immediately, pulling the curtain aside to look, her face going pale for a split second before she whispered, "Oh no, they're already here." Lena shot to her feet, rushing to the window with Carla, and her breath left her body in one slow, stunned exhale. Even through the rain, even through the storm, she could see them forming. A long line of motorcycles parked in perfect formation in the hospital parking lot, their chrome glistening under the flickering streetlights, their engines quiet but their presence deafening. Maybe 20 at first, then 30, then 40 as more headlights appeared through the rain like ghosts rising from the darkness, and the sight made the hair on Lena's arms stand up because this wasn't chaos. This wasn't anger. This was a ritual, a gathering, a silent message written in thunder and leather. Carla whispered, "They're here for him." Lena whispered back, "Are they here for me too?" Carla looked at her with uncertain eyes. "I don't think they're here to hurt you. Bikers don't attack the people who help their own. But they will want answers." Just then Ryder groaned on the bed, stirring weakly, his eyes fluttering open with confusion and pain, and Lena rushed back to his side, holding his hand gently as he tried to focus. "Lena," he breathed, voice cracked and fragile. "They are here," she nodded slowly. "I know." His eyes filled with fear. "They'll scare you, they'll scare everyone." But Lena shook her head, brushing his hair from his forehead the way a mother would comfort a child. "Ryder, you came to my diner hurt and scared. I'm not going to be afraid of people who love you." Ryder blinked slowly, absorbing her words, a tear forming in the corner of his eye. "Nobody's ever stood up for me like that." Lena smiled sadly. "Then nobody's been paying attention." Outside, the roar of more engines echoed, louder than the storm now, shaking the windows as new headlights appeared in long rows, growing, multiplying, filling the lot until the hospital staff pressed against the walls in fear. Inside, Ryder squeezed Lena's hand with what little strength he had left. "I tried to warn you," he whispered. "When one of us falls, the whole family rises." Lena leaned closer. "Then let them rise. I didn't save you to hide from them." And as thunder cracked across the sky like a warning from God himself, 3 words appeared on phones across the biker world: "She protected him." And that meant only one thing: by sunrise. Lena wouldn't just have bikers outside her diner. She would have an army that considered her one of their own. The storm had softened by dawn, but the air outside the hospital vibrated with a deep growling tension as more and more motorcycles rolled into the parking lot in long, disciplined lines that looked less like a gathering and more like an army taking position, their headlights cutting through the fading darkness like fierce white eyes, their engines humming low and controlled, and inside the hospital. Lena felt the entire building tremble from the echoes, her heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of those machines even though she had never been near a biker club in her life. She stood beside Ryder's bed, her hands still wrapped around his, watching his chest rise and fall under the thin blanket as nurses moved carefully around him, constantly glancing at the window in fear and curiosity. But Lena didn't flinch, didn't move back, because after everything she had seen, the broken ribs, the bruises, the fear in his voice, she knew something deeper was happening, something bigger than the injuries and bigger than the police lies, something tied to loyalty and brotherhood and pain that stretched far beyond tonight's storm. And as she stood there, Ryder's eyes fluttered again, soft and confused, and he whispered her name like it anchored him to the world. "Lena, they are here." And she squeezed his hand gently, whispering back, "I know, Ryder, but they're not here to hurt me." Though inside her chest her pulse thudded with uncertainty because she still didn't know what these bikers expected, didn't know how they would react to a stranger protecting one of their own, didn't know if this gathering would bring her gratitude or danger, but she wasn't going to abandon Ryder now that she had stepped into this storm with him. Then the door creaked open and Deputy Carla entered with a tight expression on her face, glancing first at Ryder, then at Lena, and then toward the window where the parking lot was now full of leather jackets marked with the same patch Ryder wore. Hell's Angels, but not the ones from movies or rumors. These men stood tall and silent, staring at the hospital doors as if guarding a temple. And Carla whispered, "Lena, they're asking for you." And Lena's stomach twisted with fear and disbelief as she whispered back, "Me? Why me?" And Carla answered, "Because word's spreading in their radios, their phones, their channels. They all know what you did last night. They know you protected Ryder. They want to talk to the woman who stood between him and police batons." Ryder's grip on Lena's hand tightened weakly, his voice trembling as he whispered, "You don't have to go. They can be intense, scary, loud." But Lena leaned closer and touched his forehead gently, whispering, "You were scared last night too. And I didn't walk away from you then. I'm not walking away now." Ryder looked at her with a quiet, fragile awe, the kind that came from someone who never expected kindness from anyone. Lena stepped toward the door with Carla beside her, and as they walked down the hospital hallway, nurses pulled back nervously, doctors whispered into their radios, and patients stared from behind curtains, each person sensing the shift in the air, because it wasn't every day hundreds of bikers surrounded a hospital in total silence. When Lena and Carla reached the automatic doors at the entrance, Lena paused for a moment, taking a deep breath as her reflection stared back at her in the glass. Tired eyes, messy hair, a face that had spent years fighting quiet daily battles she never spoke about. And she whispered to herself, "You got this," even though her heart felt like a drum beating inside a cage. The doors slid open with a cold gust of morning air, and instantly every biker in the lot turned their heads toward her. An entire sea of leather and steel shifting in one synchronized motion that made her breath catch, because there was nothing chaotic about them. They weren't shouting, weren't storming forward, they were simply standing, and watching, and waiting. And then one man stepped out from the front row, a tall figure with a gray beard, sharp eyes, and the kind of presence that made even the air go still. Ryder's father, the regional president of the club. He walked forward slowly, boots crunching against the wet pavement, and when he stopped in front of Lena, he didn't shout or intimidate or stare her down. He simply looked at her with a deep, heavy intensity that felt like an entire lifetime of grief, pride, and fear lived inside him. "You're Lena," he said in a voice roughened by years of riding, loss, and leadership. Lena nodded quietly. "Yes." He studied her face for a long, silent moment, his eyes searching for something, truth, courage, sincerity, and whatever he found made his shoulders relax the slightest bit. "My son," he said slowly, "would be dead if not for you." Lena swallowed hard, whispering, he needed help. Anyone should have helped him. The president's eyes hardened, a storm brewing behind them. "But no one did," he said. "Except you." Behind him, the crowd of bikers stood like statues, their patches glistening under the wet morning light, some with arms crossed, some with hands resting on their belts, some simply waiting with quiet respect. Ryder's father took another step closer, lowering his voice but making each word hit Lena like a weight. "In our world," he said, "there is nothing, nothing, more sacred than protecting one of our own when he's down. And you, a stranger, stood between my son and danger without knowing who he was." Lena felt her throat tighten, tears threatening to rise, because she was just a tired woman running a small diner, someone who barely got by, someone who lived life quietly in the background. And now here she was being stared at by 200 men who treated her like she had done something heroic. The president slowly placed his hand over his heart. A gesture Lena didn't understand until dozens of bikers behind him mirrored the motion, their leather vests creaking, their bodies moving in perfect unity. Then he said words that made Lena's breath hitch. From this moment on, you are under our protection. No one touches you. No one threatens you. No one disrespects you. Not the police, not the town, not anyone. The bikers nodded once, the sound of their boots shifting on the pavement echoing like thunder. Carla glanced at Lena, eyes wide with disbelief. Lena's voice shook as she whispered, I didn't do it for protection. The president smiled, sadly, knowingly. I know. And that is why you earned it. And as the rising sun lit the wet streets in orange light, Lena realized something life-changing. She hadn't just helped a stranger. She had stepped into a brotherhood, a world where loyalty wasn't spoken, it was lived. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. Lena had barely processed Ryder's father's words when the hospital doors opened again behind her and a nurse stepped out nervously, calling out, Sir, Ryder is asking for you, and the president looked at Lena with a quick flash of vulnerability before walking toward the entrance with heavy, deliberate steps, his boots splashing through shallow puddles as dozens of bikers silently made way for him, parting like a river splitting for its king, and Lena followed closely behind with Carla at her side, her heart pounding as she realized she was now walking shoulder to shoulder with a man whose reputation could scare entire towns but whose face now carried nothing except fear for his son. Inside the hospital hallways, staff pressed themselves against walls, whispering as the president passed, but he ignored all the looks, focusing only on the door where Ryder lay recovering, and when he stepped inside and saw his son, bandaged, pale, breathing weakly, his entire body shuddered in a silent heartbreak that hit Lena harder than any roar of engines outside, because for the first time she saw him not as a powerful president but as a father. Terrified of losing his child, and he moved to Ryder's bedside with trembling hands, cupping his son's bruised cheek gently as Ryder opened his eyes and whispered, Dad, in a voice so small it cut through the room like a blade. The president leaned down, forehead almost touching Ryder's, whispering, I'm here, son. I'm here now, and Ryder's eyes filled with tears, his voice cracking as he said, I thought they were going to kill me. And his father's jaw tightened, fury and grief mixing in his eyes, but he didn't let the rage spill yet, he just held Ryder's hand in both of his, whispering, Not anymore, no one touches you again. And then Ryder shifted weakly, turning his eyes toward Lena, whispering, She saved me, Dad, she stood between me and them, she didn't even know who I was. And the president looked at Lena again, this time with gratitude so powerful it made Lena shift back a step, overwhelmed by how intensely this man felt everything. Pain, loyalty, love, grief, and Ryder continued, Dad, she didn't run, she didn't look away, she fought for me. And the president swallowed hard, placing a hand on Lena's shoulder with a heavy respect as he said quietly, You saved the only family I have left. Because in that moment Lena learned something she hadn't known. Ryder had lost his mother years ago, and his father had raised him alone, through violence, scars, and the unforgiving life of the road, which made his pain tonight twice as sharp, and his father's gratitude 10 times deeper. Ryder struggled to sit up, wincing as pain shot through his ribs, and Lena quickly reached forward to steady him, her hand behind his back as he whispered, Thank you, for not letting me die alone, for not letting them hurt me. And Lena, fighting tears, whispered, You were scared. Anyone would have helped, but Ryder shook his head weakly, whispering, No, not anyone. The others moved away. You were the only one who stepped forward. And Lena felt her heart twist because she knew he was right. Not everyone would have done what she did. Not everyone would have protected a stranger in a leather vest when police were shouting threats. Not everyone would have risked their business, their life, their peace. But Lena had done it without thinking because she had spent years being ignored, judged, dismissed, and she refused to do that to anyone else. The president cleared his throat and spoke again, his voice deeper now, filled with a steady fire. Ryder, tell me everything. Every detail, and Ryder recounted the night. How he tried to stop a man from hurting a woman at a bar, how the attacker's friends were officers, how they beat him behind the dumpsters and claimed he resisted arrest, How he ran to the diner because he saw lights and thought maybe, just maybe, someone inside would show mercy. Lena felt her hands curl into fists as every detail spilled out, each one uglier than the last, and when Ryder finished speaking, the president stood still for a long, quiet moment, his eyes lowered, his breath controlled. His rage contained not because it was weak but because it was too powerful to unleash inside a hospital. And finally he whispered, "Son, we will handle this." And Ryder nodded with full trust, the kind of trust only a biker son had for a biker father. Then Ryder looked at Lena again, and this time something different flickered in his eyes. Gratitude mixed with connection, mixed with something softer. Something that made Lena inhale sharply as if she felt the warmth of that look all the way inside her ribs. And he whispered, "I owe you my life." But Lena shook her head, whispering, "You don't owe me anything," and Ryder smiled weakly. "You don't understand our world. Saving someone's life means you're part of the family now," and outside, as if the universe heard his words, the engines of over 200 bikes roared once in unison. A sound not of threat but of promise, of loyalty, of a brotherhood acknowledging the woman who had become special to one of their own. The president squeezed Lena's shoulder again and whispered, "You're with us now. Whether you realize it or not," and Lena's breath caught because for years she had stood alone, fighting bills, keeping her diner alive, surviving every struggle quietly. But now an entire army stood behind her, not because she asked for it, not because she paid for it, but because she did one thing no one else did, she cared. And that single moment of courage had just changed her entire life. The hospital room felt smaller as evening settled in, the sky outside turning a deep orange that slowly melted into purple, the soft hum of medical machines blending with the distant rumble of hundreds of bikes still guarding the parking lot. And inside the dim light of Ryder's room, Lena sat silently on the chair beside him, watching him sleep with a softness she didn't even know she carried inside her anymore, her thoughts. Heavy and quiet like the calm before a storm she knew wasn't finished yet. Because even though Ryder was safe, even though the truth had finally been spoken aloud, Lena could feel deep in her bones that the real consequences were still coming. The police who hurt him, the people who allowed it, the officers who lied, the entire chain of corruption that nearly took a young man's life, all of that still waited in the shadows. And she knew men like Ryder's father weren't the type to let injustice fade quietly. As she sat there, Marcy, the night nurse, peeked inside, whispering, "They haven't left, not a single one." And Lena turned her head toward the window to see that the bikes were still lined up in rows, headlights off but presence loud enough to shake the air, and she whispered, "They're waiting for him." But Marcy replied, "They're waiting for you too." And Lena felt a shiver run through her spine because she still wasn't used to the idea that she, a tired diner owner with unpaid bills and cracked shoes, had become important to so many strangers overnight simply because she did what any decent person should have done. Ryder stirred slightly, his face tightening in pain as he shifted on the bed, and Lena leaned forward immediately, taking his hand gently and whispering, "It's okay, you're not alone anymore." And Ryder's eyes fluttered open, tired but warm, landing on her face with a depth that made her heart squeeze, and he whispered, "You're still here," as if he couldn't believe someone would choose to stay beside him for this long. And Lena nodded softly. "I said I wouldn't leave," she replied, brushing a lock of hair away from his forehead with careful fingers. And Ryder's grip tightened slightly, weak but sincere, his voice barely audible. "I didn't think anyone would fight for me," he murmured, "not after everything I've seen, everything I've been through." And Lena felt her chest tighten because she could see the truth in his eyes. Years of battles, losses, betrayals, the exhausting weight of always being seen as a threat before being seen as a human being. And she whispered, "Everyone deserves someone who stands up for them." And Ryder blinked hard as if trying not to cry. Their quiet moment was interrupted when the door swung open and Ryder's father entered with two trusted bikers behind him, all three men removing their hats respectfully the moment they stepped inside, their faces softening when they saw Ryder awake, and the president walked forward with a slow, heavy gait that carried years of leadership and heartbreak, placing a hand on his son's shoulder before turning to Lena with gratitude etched deeply across his features. "Doctors say he'll make a full recovery," he said, voice low but steady, "because you got him here in time." And Lena stood up slowly out of instinct, unsure how to respond to such heavy thanks, but the president stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I owe you more than words, Lena," he said, and his tone was so serious that Lena felt her breath catch. because biker men didn't speak with this kind of softness unless it meant something permanent. All my life, the president continued, I've feared someone would take my boy from me, the way the world has taken everything else. And Ryder lowered his eyes, swallowing hard, as if the honesty hurt him too. But you, a stranger, shielded him with your own body. And the president's voice broke slightly, barely noticeable but enough to make Lena's heart ache. Why? He whispered. Why would you risk yourself for him? Lena looked at Ryder, then back at his father, her voice steady though emotion swam in her eyes. Because I know what it feels like to be alone when you're hurting, and I wasn't going to let him face that alone, she said, not when I could help. The room fell silent, deep and thick, filled with the kind of shared emotion that didn't need words, and Ryder's father closed his eyes for a long second before opening them with a look that was no longer just gratitude but respect. The kind of respect that couldn't be bought, earned only through courage and humanity. He stepped back, nodding to his men, and one of them, a younger biker named Switch, opened the door wider as more angels quietly filled the hallway outside, forming a silent barrier. Around the room, and the president said softly, We're moving him to a safer location tonight, and Lena's entire body tensed. Safer? She whispered. Isn't he safe here? The president hesitated for the first time, his jaw tightening. The cops who hurt him, they're angry. They're scared. And scared men do violent things, he said. I won't risk them trying to finish what they started. Ryder looked at his father, then at Lena, fear flickering in his eyes again. You think they'll come here? Ryder asked. The president nodded slowly. If they think they can cover their tracks. Lena's stomach dropped. What about the hospital staff? The patients, she whispered. The president answered simply, We'll protect them too. We're not criminals, Lena. We protect what's ours. And then he looked straight into her eyes. And you are now one of ours. The words hit her harder than thunder, not frightening but grounding, like someone placing a warm blanket over a shaking body. Ryder squeezed her hand again and whispered, Come with us, please. His voice breaking, and Lena hesitated only for a breath before nodding, because she couldn't walk away now, not when the storm was still approaching, not when Ryder looked at her like she was the only safe thing left in his world. And as the bikers prepared to move Ryder into a secure convoy, Lena stepped outside into the night where hundreds of engines roared to life, not in warning, not in threat, but in honor of the woman who chose bravery over fear, compassion over comfort, and humanity over silence. The night air outside the hospital felt charged with something electric and heavy as the bikers formed their convoy. Engines humming like a heartbeat that stretched across the entire parking lot, and Lena stood among them. With her jacket pulled tight, the reality of everything settling slowly into her chest. How one small act of courage had pulled her into a world she never knew, a world built on loyalty, brotherhood, and a kind of fierce love she had only ever dreamed existed. Ryder lay on a stretcher being carefully secured inside a black transport van, the interior padded, warm, and protected by two senior bikers who stood as if they were guarding a king. And Lena climbed in beside him because when she tried to step back earlier, Ryder had looked at her with such panic, like a child terrified of being left behind, that she knew she couldn't leave him, not now, not while danger still circled them like a vulture looking for a weak spot. As the doors closed, Ryder reached for her hand with trembling fingers, whispering, Stay close, please. And Lena squeezed his hand gently, whispering, I'm right here. As the convoy began to move, hundreds of bikes rolling out of the parking lot in perfect formation. Headlights glowing like a river of stars flowing down the dark highway, their engines roaring in synchronized bursts that made the ground vibrate beneath them. Inside the van, Ryder kept his eyes on Lena's face as if memorizing every line of it, whispering, I still don't understand why you helped me. Why you risked so much. And Lena brushed a stray tear from his cheek, whispering back, because someone had to. Ryder swallowed hard, emotion filling his voice as he murmured, No one ever protects me, except my dad, and now you. And he closed his eyes like he was absorbing the warmth of her presence the way a man lost in the cold absorbs the first hint of sunlight. Ahead of them, the convoy surrounded the van with protective precision, and as they reached the diner road, Lena saw something she didn't expect. Every biker had stopped in front of her diner, their engines idling calmly as they lined up on both sides of the street like guardians waiting for their queen. And when the van pulled up, Ryder's father stepped forward, raising one hand in the air. Instantly all engines went silent. The sudden quiet so powerful it made Lena's heart skip. Ryder's father opened the van's door and helped his son out gently, his face a mixture of relief and fury that had finally settled into something softer, and he turned to the crowd of bikers and shouted, "Brothers, this woman saved my son's life," and hundreds of voices erupted in a thunderous roar, the kind that could shake mountains and make stars tremble. But it wasn't a roar of chaos. It was a roar of respect, gratitude, honor, every man slamming his boots or revving his engine in a rhythm that felt like a salute crafted from thunder. Lena stood there stunned, tears stinging her eyes, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of their loyalty, and Ryder's father stepped toward her with a seriousness that made the world feel like it had stopped spinning. "Lena," he said, voice heavy with emotion, "in our world loyalty is everything, and you showed more loyalty in one night than some men show in a lifetime." He reached into his vest and pulled out a folded piece of cloth, a small leather patch with their insignia, and placed it gently in her trembling hands. "This is not a membership," he said quietly. "This is honor. You are family now. If you ever need us, one call and we will fill these streets again." Ryder, still leaning on the van for support, watched her with eyes full of something raw and heartfelt, a connection forming that neither of them wanted to name yet, but both could feel deep in their chests like a warm fire spreading slowly. The president continued, "Your diner is under our protection. Your name is under our protection. You will never stand alone again," and as he said the words, every biker lifted 2 fingers to their forehead in a silent salute, a gesture so full of unity and loyalty that Lena's breath caught, her knees nearly giving out under the tsunami of emotion. She stepped forward, tears flowing freely now, and whispered, "I didn't think I mattered to anyone, not really, not outside my little diner." And Ryder's father shook his head gently, replying, "You mattered to us the second you stood between my boy and danger." Ryder pushed himself toward her, wincing in pain, but refusing to stay back, and when he reached her, he took her hands into his own and whispered with trembling sincerity, "You didn't just save me. You saved something in me I thought was gone." And Lena's heart broke open in the softest, deepest way possible. The convoy began to roar their engines again, this time in celebration, their sound echoing off buildings and traveling down streets as if announcing to the whole world that something powerful had happened here. Something bigger than just violence or fear, something rooted in humanity and courage. As the sun rose behind them, casting golden light over the scene, Ryder leaned his forehead against Lena's and whispered, "I won't forget what you did for me, ever." And she whispered back, "You don't have to." And in that moment, with engines thundering, with bikers saluting, with the dawn breaking over a street filled with loyalty, Lena realized something she never expected. One act of kindness had not only saved a life, it had built her a new family, a new strength, a new place in the world where she wasn't invisible or alone. She had become part of something fierce and beautiful. And everyone in that town, everyone who had ignored her diner, everyone who had dismissed her, would soon learn that hurting Lena now meant facing an army of 300 riders who would burn the world down before letting harm come to her again.